So, that Final Fantasy VII Remake ending, huh? Before I begin, it might go without saying, but I want to make this very clear for anyone in doubt. We are going to be diving deep into the ending of the Final Fantasy VII Remake and what that means for the series going forward. So, expect big spoilers for both the original game and the new remake. That means, do not watch any further unless you've completed the game yourself or you don't mind being spoiled. With that out of the way, let's get started. Final Fantasy VII Remake lied to us. It isn't a remake at all. To be precise, about 85% of the FF7 Remake's running time is a faithful retelling of one of the most beloved video games of all time, with some minor changes and embellishments made over the course of the story to either bring the game up to modern narrative standards, to make everything a little more cohesive to newcomers, or to add depth where scope allowed. But then, we get to literally the last couple of hours of the game, and everything changes. Let's bring it all back for a second first, though. The identity and significance of the ghostly, cloaked figures that haunted Cloud, Aerith and co throughout the remake was probably one of the biggest new mysteries added to the game, and it was seeded very early on, literally alongside Aerith's introduction in Sector 8 on Loveless Street. But it actually fell to Red 13 to eventually explain their role, dozens of hours later in the Shinra building.
Perhaps best described as arbiters of fate.
By that time, we'd witnessed them intervening, blocking, or outright attacking characters throughout the game, and even got into a couple of fights with them ourselves. Yet their motivations remained shrouded in mystery. It eventually transpires that they're called Whispers, and act as arbiters of fate. As Red 13 explains, these Whispers are drawn to individuals who would try to alter destiny's course and ensure they do not. Fate, in this context, is described as a fixed state. And this fixed state is the will of the planet itself. So these Whispers act solely to ensure that events play out the way the planet intends them to. They swarm around Wedge in the slums, keeping him in place when the plate falls. They also interrupt any time someone gets close to telling Cloud his true origins, like Hojo in his lab, and when Cloud tries to intercept Sephiroth on top of the Shinra building.
What? Oh, what is this fascinating phenomenon? What's happening? Where are you taking me?
They stop the gang's iconic green truck just to preserve the flow of destiny. So, from these particular instances, we can draw a pretty strong conclusion that the fate that the planet has in store for everyone is in line with the events of the original game.
Cloud, you okay?
I take advantage of whatever I can, and discard that which I cannot. There is no room for sentiment or guilt.
Now, this is very much emphasized the first time the remake attempts to deviate dramatically from the events of Final Fantasy VII. In President Shinra's office, towards the end of the game, the party comes face to face with Sephiroth as he murders President Shinra himself. This is broadly what happens in the original game, save for the fact that the president is killed off screen. But then, something very unexpected happens. Sephiroth stabs Bharat in front of the group, and Bharat apparently falls down dead. Then, almost immediately, one of the Whispers intervenes. It somehow tends to Bharat's wound as the rest of the group fight Genova Dreamweaver, and thus Bharat's life is saved almost as soon as this shocking twist is introduced. The group really didn't even have time to react or to mourn him. So, what exactly was the point of the scene then? Well, fans know Bharat is not supposed to die in the original game, so this entire sequence would suggest that the Whispers are there to stop anything that falls outside the natural order of things, i.e. what we know to be the timeline of the original game. This death was not the one ordained for you by fate, is the exact phrase Red 13 uses.
This death was not the one ordained for you by fate.
Listen.
But here's where things start to get a little wild. The party take off down the highway and attempt to escape the city. Meanwhile, the Whispers all converge on Shinra HQ, huge clouds of them protecting the building from destruction and stopping anyone from getting in or out. The story then deviates from the original timeline again by having Sephiroth, seemingly, very much present, disrupting the natural order and the planet's will. The planet, all the voices that make up the life stream, cry out in pain. And all of a sudden, we cut to a completely different scene. It's broad daylight, whereas the previous scene was nighttime, so we can assume this is not happening simultaneously. Then, shockingly, we see Zack, a crucial character from the original game whose role is not made clear until quite late on. Zack is overlooking Midgar, and in his scene, it's also clouded by whispers, though he doesn't seem to see them. This scene quickly mirrors one right at the end of Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, as Zack faces a small army of Shinra guards, letting fans know this is the day that Zack dies. Yet, there are now whispers floating among the guards, although no one, Zack included, reacts to them.
Price of freedom is steep. Embrace your dreams. And whatever happens, protect your honor. As a soldier! Come and get it!
Switching back to our party's current predicament, we see Sephiroth cut a path through the barrier of whispers trying to contain them all, and he disappears. Sephiroth is now outside the bounds of the fate the planet has in store for them all. Then Aerith basically gets meta, also defying the whispers and creating a different rift, and claiming that from now on, it's the point of no return. This is Destiny's crossroads. What she, and by extension Square Enix, is saying is that this is where they turn off the path of the remake into something totally different. What will we find on the other side? Freedom, she says. Is that the developers claiming freedom from the narrative constraints of the past? They go to great pains to have Aerith, the heart of the entire story of Final Fantasy VII, explain that if they take this course, the party will be changing more than fate itself, they'll be changing their very selves. A pretty bold statement of intent for things to come.
I guess maybe that's why I hesitated.
Once the party step through the golden rift created by Aerith, all hell breaks loose as they battle a huge whisper, the Whisper Harbinger, and some smaller whispers that fight for it, which, if you use assess on them, are from a future timeline that has manifested in present day. They fight to protect the future that gave shape to them. Interesting. While the heroes fight these entities, Midgar is torn apart around them. And it's around this time that we start to see flashes of what we know to be scenes from later on in the timeline of the original game, including seemingly footage from Advent children showing clips from the Forgotten City. There's also a glimpse of the remade scene from the post-credits sequence of the original game, which shows an older Red 13 running through a valley with some cubs, eventually stopping to overlook an overgrown and presumably abandoned Midgar that has been given back to nature. Red 13 in the present day literally says, this is a glimpse of what will happen if we fail here today. OG players will know this is how the original game ends. This is now the fate the characters are actively trying to avoid. Throughout the fight, we keep seeing glimpses of scenes later in the story, like meteor hanging over the planet. What would have been taken as teasers for events to come in later remake installments now take on a different air, as the party keeps saying things to the effect of, this can't be our future, and the future is always a blank page. As these flash forwards become more and more frequent the closer they get to defeating the Harbinger, it's strongly implied that we're erasing these events as the party are actively working to change the fate the planet has in store for them.
I'm waiting, Cloud.
The Whispers are defeated, but Sephiroth is still a threat. He then absorbs the Whispers into Masamune, and in another scene, heavily inspired by Advent children, starts hurling buildings at the party. this point, they fight Sephiroth, and he seems to have control over the Whispers, sending them to attack, something that certainly did not happen at this point in the original game. Now that they have defied fate and defied the planet, perhaps the Whispers just want to crush them by any means necessary. At any rate, Sephiroth then transports Cloud to the edge of creation, asking for Cloud's strength to defy destiny together. The entire setting and ensuing clash are very reminiscent of their final fight in the original game. We basically skipped all the way forward to their last showdown, until Sephiroth puts a stop to it, noting that it simply isn't time yet.
Hey, Cloud. You see that?
After this very confusing turn of events, we're back with Zack Fair, somehow still standing after all the Shinra guards are defeated. The Whispers around Midgar disappear in a cloud of golden light. Presumably, the golden light is a representation of the hero's direct influence. Golden sparkles rain down as Zack looks on, confused, and very much alive after the point at which we know he canonically dies. The scene then cuts to the slums being rebuilt, another event that originally didn't happen, with Marl and co seeing the sparkles too. Then we cut to a room above the Leaf House School, and Biggs is alive, another deviation from the fate that the planet ordained. Marlene senses her dad. The camera then shifts and we see the party overlooking Midgar, which has not been destroyed despite the scenes we just witnessed during the final battles.
I'll come back.
Now, in the closing montage of the game, there's an odd moment where we see Zack.
Wait. Was that all of them?
In this moment, a crisp packet featuring Shinra propaganda mascot Stamp is shown very prominently and deliberately blowing past the camera. Stamp is glimpsed throughout the game as Avalanche use graffiti of the dog to message their members in plain sight. So you're quickly familiarized with the fact that Stamp is a cute black, white and tan beagle type dog. We've even seen this crisp packet before in Jesse's parents' house and at Seventh Heaven. But here, now, Stamp is a different breed of dog entirely, illustrating beyond a doubt that what we're witnessing is taking place in an alternate timeline to the one we just played in the remake. Did the party walk through into this timeline? Or will alternate timelines be a concept explored in the next installment? Either way, we're being shown they exist for a reason.
Yeah, they really captured the essence of corporate propaganda.
I miss it. The steel sky.
I would be lost.
The title card at the end of the game reads, "The unknown journey will continue." That capitalization seems very pointed.
Time after.
Is this perhaps why marketing for the Final Fantasy VII Remake hasn't included allusions to it being Part 1 or Episode 1? Because from this point onwards, it isn't a remake, it's a new game, and thus will be called something entirely different. Final Fantasy VII The Unknown Journey, perhaps? It would certainly tie into what we're being told by the game itself. They walked through the rift after being told they'd be changed by it. They defied fate, even though fate in this context is literally the story that we know and love. Square is telling us, in no uncertain terms, that it's not a remake anymore. It's going to be a new game, and I wouldn't be surprised if that means no Aerith death, among other things. Aerith in particular is terrified of the Whispers. She says that every time they touch her, she loses a part of herself, maybe because her fate, in their eyes, means certain death. Cloud too saw glimpses of the destiny that awaited Aerith at several points throughout the story. He even shed a tear over it. So the group are going to be doing whatever they can to avoid that fate, now that they've had something of a warning about it.
Flowers.
It's okay. We'll find a way out together. So, what now?
Cards on the table, I'm personally not thrilled with Square Enix going an entirely new direction with Final Fantasy VII episodes to come. I think the reason I and many other fans were excited for a faithful remake was because we'd had years of marginally disappointing prequels and sequels and compilation of Final Fantasy VII content, and this project promised something many had wanted all along. A familiar recreation of the game that we fell in love with. And after doing such a great job with 90% of the remake, in which we're encouraged to imagine all the favourite moments still to come in subsequent installments, now it turns out we're getting something entirely different. And sure, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but in particular, having Zack alive feels like it undermines the entire story of Final Fantasy VII in many ways, because his death is the catalyst for Cloud becoming the hero that he does. The Whispers have given Square a legitimate story-based reason to change pretty much whatever it likes in future episodes, because it can now have as many timeline versions of events as it likes. It's gutsy, I'll give it that, but messing with timelines and making things more convoluted than they really need to be with alternate versions of characters colliding and jumping around and waxing lyrical about fate and destiny doesn't make for a satisfying tale. It's all going a bit Sora/Roxas in Kingdom Hearts, when that's not what fans were promised here. They wanted to spend time with characters they already knew and love, and see a great story reimagined for a modern age. I mean, yes, of course we'll always have the original game, but there are ways of updating and improving on the original in a remake without resorting to timeline jumping. This game was doing it perfectly well up to that point, with snappier dialogue, fleshed out side characters, new layers to older narratives. What happens from now onwards is anybody's guess. But one thing is for sure, this isn't a remake anymore. But what do you think about where the series might go from here? Maybe you're glad Square is changing things up. Let us know in the comments because I am genuinely fascinated as to what the responses to this will be. In the meantime, you can check out some of our other Final Fantasy VII Remake videos, which should be on screen now. Thanks for watching. Bye!
Floating up high.